The old rancher's shaky hands saw a dad try to sell his own girl for booze. What happened next would stay with the town of Copper Ridge forever. Frank Morrison had seen much bad in his 67 years, but nothing got him ready for what happened that hot Tuesday in Murphy's saloon. The smell of smoke and sweat was thick as he drank his weekly beer, trying to forget another lonely day on his failing farm. The dry spell was awful. His cows were dying, and his debts were growing like storm clouds. That's when Jake Wheeler came through the doors, pulling a scared girl behind him. The child couldn't be more than 14, her torn dress barely hanging on. Her thin body. Frank felt cold as he saw the clear signs of hunger and harm on her pale face. Wheeler was drunk again, swaying as he went to the bar. His voice was thick as he yelled to Murphy, the bar owner, "I got something to trade for that good whiskey you keep locked up." Frank watched in horror as Wheeler pushed the girl forward like she was an animal. "My daughter Sarah, here. She's young. She's untouched. Worth at least 3 bottles of your best." The saloon went quiet, except for the clock's tick. Even the toughest cowboys shifted in their seats. Murphy's face twisted in disgust as he backed away from the bar. "Get out of here, Wheeler. I run a bar, not a... I won't be part of this crazy thing." But Wheeler wasn't giving up. His need was worse than his unwashed body. "Someone here has to want her. I got debts to pay, and she's all I got left." He grabbed Sarah's arm so hard she cried out, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal trying to get out. Frank felt something break inside him. The girl's scared look reminded him of someone he'd lost long ago, someone he'd failed to keep safe when it mattered most. His dead wife's voice came to mind. "Frank, some things are worth more than money or pride." Standing slowly, Frank's chair scraped the wooden floor. Every eye in the saloon turned to him as he walked to Wheeler, his boots clicking loudly. The girl looked up at him with empty eyes that had seen too much hurt for someone so young. "How much?" Frank's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the quiet like a knife. Wheeler's eyes lit up with a sick win. 3 bottles of Murphy's best whiskey, or $20 cash. Frank reached into his vest pocket, his hand shaking as he counted out the last of his savings. But as he held the money, something dangerous showed in the eyes of the other men watching. And Sarah's father wasn't done asking for things. Frank's $20 hit the bar, sealing both their futures. But what Wheeler asked for next would test everything good the old rancher had left. "Deal?" Wheeler mumbled, grabbing the money before Frank could change his mind. "But I want her gone today. Don't want to see her face around here anymore." Leaned closer to Frank, his whiskey breath making the rancher's stomach turn. "And old man, you better treat her right. She's been difficult lately, needs a firm hand to keep her in line." Frank's jaw tightened as he looked down at Sarah. The girl stood still, between fear and confusion, clearly not understanding that her whole world had just been sold for less than a good horse. Her empty eyes looked at Frank's face, trying to guess what he wanted, but finding only the worn face of a man who'd learned to hide his feelings behind years of hard times. "Come on, child," Frank said gently, holding out his hand. Sarah pulled back as if he'd hit her, pressing herself against the bar. The fear in her moves told him everything about her life with Wheeler. Murphy watched, clearly uneasy. "Frank, are you sure about this? Maybe we should get the sheriff talk to Reverend Patterson." "No law against what just happened," Frank replied. Grimly, Wheeler's her father. His choice to make. The words tasted bad in his mouth. But he knew the harsh truth of justice on the frontier. Fathers owned their kids like things, and courts rarely stepped in with family matters. Wheeler put the money in his pocket and left without a look back at his daughter. "She's your problem now, Morrison. Don't come crying to me when she runs off or causes trouble." As the door closed behind Wheeler, Frank knelt to Sarah's level. She flinched away from him, her small hands shaking. "Listen, child, I know you're scared. I know you don't trust me. But I'm not going to hurt you." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What? ... What are you going to do with me?" Before Frank could answer, the saloon doors burst open again. 3 rough-looking men walked in, their eyes instantly finding Sarah. Frank knew them as part of Dutch Morgan's group, men who lived by violence and worse. The biggest one, a scarred brute named Cobb, grinned, showing missing teeth. Well, well. Herd Wheeler was looking to make a trade. Looks like we're too late. Cobb's eyes moved over Sarah in a way that made Frank's blood boil. "Tell you what, old man, I'll give you $30 for the girl, double what you paid." Frank stepped in front of Sarah to shield her, his hand moving to the gun on his hip. "She's not for sale." Cobb laughed, a sound like rocks in a bucket. "Everything's for sale out here, Morrison. Question is, you want to do this the easy way or the hard way?" The other people in the saloon quietly moved toward the doors, sensing trouble. Murphy ducked behind the bar, reaching for his shotgun. Sarah grabbed Frank's coat tightly, her small body shaking. Frank felt the weight of every choice that led to this moment. He thought he was saving the girl. But now he'd put both their lives in danger. Frank's hand was over his gun as Cobb stepped closer. But what the girl whispered behind him changed everything. Her words showed a horror that made the current danger seem like child's play. "Please, don't let them take me." Sarah's voice shook against Frank's back. "They're the ones who hurt my sister before she disappeared." Frank's blood turned to ice. He'd heard stories about girls going missing from the area, but seeing the pure fear in Sarah's eyes proved his worst fears. These weren't just bad guys looking for a chance. They were bad people who'd been watching her family for months. Cobb seemed to notice Sarah knew him, and his fake smile vanished. Girls got quite an imagination. Maybe she needs someone to teach her when to keep her mouth shut. He cracked his knuckles in a scary way. "Last chance, old man. Hand her over and walk away with your teeth." Frank's mind raced through his choices. The saloon was empty except for Murphy, who was pale as a ghost behind the bar. 3 armed men against 1. Old rancher and a scared child. The odds couldn't be worse. But Frank had fought in worse spots during his army days. And something about Sarah's tight grip reminded him why he'd stopped running from fights years ago. "Murphy," Frank called, not taking his eyes off Cobb. "You've still got that back exit through the kitchen?" "Frank, don't do anything stupid," Murphy whispered urgently. "Too late for that," Frank replied. Then he suddenly spun around, picking Sarah up in his arms. "Run!" Chaos broke out as Frank ran toward the kitchen with Sarah holding onto his neck. Cobb roared in anger, knocking over tables as he and his men chased them. Frank's old legs burned. As he crashed through the kitchen door, Sarah's weight making every step feel heavy. Behind them, gunshots exploded as Cobb's men fired wildly. Wood broke around them as Frank kicked open the back door and stumbled into the alley. His horse, Dusty, was tied 20 yards away, but it might as well have been 20 miles. "Can you ride?" Frank gasped to Sarah as they ran. "Yes, but..." Another gunshot cracked behind them, and Frank felt the bullet whistle past his ear. Sarah screamed as they reached Dusty. Frank's hands shook as he lifted her onto the saddle. The horse danced nervously, sensing the danger. Frank pulled himself up behind Sarah just as Cobb burst through the back door, gun ready. "You can't run forever, Morrison. We know where you live." As Dusty galloped away from town, Frank realized the terrible truth in Cobb's words. His ranch was alone, easy to defend, but it also trapped him and Sarah. They weren't just running from one bad spot. They were carrying secrets that could get them both killed. Mr. Sarah said over the thunder of hooves, "There's something else you need to know about why they want me." Sarah's news hit Frank harder than any bullet ever could. What she told him during that wild ride to his ranch would change everything he thought he knew about her father's deal. "My sister Emma found something before she disappeared," Sarah yelled over the wind. She was working at the hotel in town, cleaning rooms. She saw papers in Dutch Morgan's room, something about a silver mine and fake land claims. She told me about it the night before they took her. Frank's heart sank as things made sense. This wasn't just about Cobb's sick wants. Sarah was a witness to something that could ruin Dutch Morgan's whole plan. Her father hadn't just been selling her for whiskey money. He'd been getting rid of. A problem for the most dangerous man in 3 states. They reached Frank's ranch as the sun began to set, making long shadows across the dry, cracked land. The small house and barn looked peaceful, but Frank knew that peace wouldn't last. He helped Sarah down from Dusty, his mind already guessing how much time they had before Morgan's men arrived. "Inside, quickly," Frank urged, looking at the horizon for dust clouds. Sarah stumbled as they reached the porch, tiredness and fear finally catching up to her. Frank gently caught her arm, but she still flinched. Inside the simple cabin, Frank lit a single lamp and went to the window. The girl stood in the middle of the room like a lost soul, her arms wrapped around herself. For the first time, Frank really looked at her. Not just the dirt and fear, but the smartness in her eyes. The stubborn set of her jaw that sadly reminded him of his dead daughter, Lucy. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully," Frank said, checking his rifle. "Those men will come here tonight. This place can be defended, but not against a whole group. We need to be smart about this. Why are you helping me?" Sarah's voice was small but steady. "You could just give me back to them. Save yourself." Frank paused in his preparations, Sarah's question hitting deeper than she knew. He thought of Lucy, who would be about Sarah's age now if the fever hadn't taken her. He thought of all the times he'd failed to keep safe the people he loved. "Because sometimes a man gets a second chance to do right," Frank said quietly. "And sometimes that chance comes wearing a torn dress and scared eyes." Sarah stared at him for a long time, something changing in her expression. "Emma said there were good men left in the world." I stopped believing her. Before Frank could answer, Dusty whinnied nervously outside. Frank looked through the window, and his blood ran cold. Torches flickered in the distance, at least 6 riders, coming fast. Dutch Morgan himself led the group, his huge outline clear, even in the growing darkness. "They're here," Frank whispered, grabbing his bullets. "Sarah, there's a root cellar behind the kitchen. Get down there and don't come out. No matter what you hear." But Sarah shook her head, surprising him. "No, I'm tired of hiding. Emma died because she tried to do the right thing. I'm going to die too. I want to face it standing up." Frank looked at this brave, broken child and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope mixed with complete terror. Because Dutch Morgan didn't just kill people who crossed him, he made sure they suffered first. Dutch Morgan's voice boomed across the ranch yard like thunder before a storm. What he offered Frank would test every rule the old rancher had ever lived by. "Morrison, I know you're in there." Dutch's huge shape was outlined against the torchlight as he got off his horse. 6 armed men spread out around the cabin, blocking any escape. "I'm here to make you a fair offer." Frank stood at the front window, rifle ready. Sarah crouched beside him, her small hands holding a kitchen knife she'd grabbed. The sight of this child getting ready to fight grown men made Frank's chest feel tight with emotion he hadn't felt since burying his daughter. "I'm listening," Frank called back, trying to gain time to think. "The girl has something that belongs to me," Dutch replied, his tone surprisingly calm. Information that could cause problems for my business. You hand her over and I'll pay you $100. That's enough to save your ranch, pay your debts, maybe even start over somewhere nice. Frank felt Sarah stiffen beside him. $100 was more money than he'd seen in 2 years, enough to escape the dry spell. The people he owed, the endless struggle of trying to live on worthless land. All he had to do was give up one scared child. And if I refuse, Frank shouted back. Dutch's laugh was cold as winter wind. Then I take her anyway, and you end up like Emma. We'll make it look like Indians did it. Nobody asks questions about Indian attacks. Sarah's knife hand shook as she whispered, "He's telling the truth. That's what they did to my sister. Made everyone think she just walked off and got killed by Indians." Frank closed his eyes for a moment. Seeing Lucy's face in his mind, his daughter had died of fever in his arms, and there was nothing he could have done to save her. But Sarah was different. Sarah was his chance to finally keep safe someone who needed him. "Counteroffer, Dutch," Frank called out, surprising himself with how steady his voice was. "You ride away now, and I don't tell the territorial marshal about those fake mining claims." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any threat. Frank could almost feel Dutch's anger building like pressure in a boiler. When the bad guy finally spoke, his voice held death in every word. "Boys, burn them out." Torches flew through the darkness, crashing through windows and landing on the wooden porch. Flames licked eagerly at the dry wood as smoke began filling the cabin. Frank grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her toward the back door. "The barn," he gasped through the smoke. "We can make a stand there." But as they burst out of the burning house, Frank saw Dutch waiting for them in the yard, gun drawn and a smile spreading across his face like a wound. If you're enjoying this story of bravery and giving up things in the Old West, subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales of justice and heroes on the frontier. "End of the line, Morrison," Dutch said softly. "Should have taken the money." Frank Morrison's hand moved faster than it had in 20 years. But Dutch Morgan wasn't the only one with a gun pointed at them. The truth about why Frank couldn't leave. Sarah was about to be shown in the cruelest way possible. The old rancher's gun came out smoothly. Old Army moves taking over. But Dutch was ready for him, and the two guns fired at the same time. Gun flashes lighting up the night like deadly fireworks. Frank felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him around. Dutch stumbled backward, holding his chest where Frank's shot had hit him. Both men fell hard, but Dutch's boys were already moving, surrounding Frank and Sarah with guns out. Cobb ran to Dutch's side, pressing his hands against the spreading blood. "You're hit bad, Dutch." Dutch coughed up blood, but his eyes never left Frank. Still breathing, he rasped, "That's more than the old fool will be in a minute." Sarah knelt beside Frank, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands against his wounded shoulder. "Please don't die," she whispered. "Please don't leave me like everyone else." Frank looked into her scared eyes and saw his own daughter's face staring back at him. That's when the truth came out, the secret he'd kept for 15 years like a rock. In his chest, "Zara," Frank gasped, his voice getting weaker. "Your sister, Emma. She wasn't the first girl Dutch took. 15 years ago, he took my Lucy, my daughter. She was 14 too, just like you." Sarah's hand stopped on his wound, her eyes widening in shock. Your daughter." "I was away on a cattle drive," Frank continued, each word taking great effort. "When I came back, she was gone." Dutch had taken her to work for him up north. "By the time I found them, she was already dead, worked to death in one of his bad places." The men around them shifted uncomfortably as Frank's story was told. Even tough criminals had limits, and the image of a father finding his child's grave was enough to make some of them wonder about their loyalty. "I've spent 15 years wishing I could go back and save her," Frank whispered. "When I saw you in that saloon, saw your father trying to sell you, it was like God was giving me a second chance. A chance to be the father I should have been." Dutch struggled to sit up, his face pale but still twisted with meanness. "Touching story, Morrison. Too bad you're both going to join your precious Lucy very soon." But something had changed in Cobb's face. The big man looked down at Dutch, then at Sarah, then back at his bleeding boss. "Dutch, maybe we should just take the information and go. Leave the old man be. You going soft on me, Cobb?" Dutch snarled. "Boss, just thinking about my own little girl back home. She's about this one's age." For a moment, the night hung perfectly still. Frank felt his strength leaving him, but he managed to squeeze Sarah's hand one last time. The girl looked at him. With sadness and strong will that reminded him so much of Lucy, it took his breath away. "I won't let them take me," Sarah said firmly. "Whatever happens, I won't let them win." That's when they heard the sound of horses coming, a lot of them. The loud hoofbeats belonged to Sheriff Tom Bradley and a group of 12 armed men. What happened? In the next few minutes would decide if justice finally came to Copper Ridge, or if Dutch Morgan's terrible rule would go on forever. "Drop your weapons. This is the law." Bradley's voice cut through the night as his men surrounded the ranch with guns pointed at Dutch's group. The sheriff had been tracking Dutch for months, following reports of missing girls and fake land claims. Across 3 states, Dutch's men looked nervously between their wounded boss and the huge force facing them. Cobb was the first to drop his gun, his hands raised high. "I surrender, Sheriff. I'm done with this. You yellow-bellied coward." Dutch screamed, trying to raise his own gun despite his chest wound. But Frank, using his last bit of strength, knocked the gun from Dutch's hand. "It's over," Frank whispered. "Lucy can finally rest in peace." Sheriff Bradley quickly got off his horse, taking in the scene. The burning house, Frank's bloody shoulder, Sarah kneeling to protect the wounded rancher. Murphy sent word about what happened in the saloon. "We've been riding hard to get here." Sarah looked up at the sheriff with tears in her eyes. "He saved me, Mr. Morrison. Saved me from all of them." As the group secured Dutch's remaining men, Bradley knelt beside Frank. "We found Emma's body last week, hidden in a canyon north of town. She had Dutch's papers clutched in her hand. Proof of the mining fraud that'll put him away for life." Frank felt a weight lift from his chest that had nothing to do with his wound. Emma was brave, just like Sarah here. Dutch was put onto a horse, barely awake, but still cursing. "This ain't over, Morrison. I got friends who will finish what I started." But Frank was no longer listening to Dutch's threats. His focus was entirely on Sarah, who had refused to leave his side even as the doctor from town arrived to treat his wound. "What's going to happen to me now?" Sarah asked quietly as the group got ready to leave. Frank winced as the doctor cleaned his shoulder. But his voice was steady. "That's your choice, child. Your father has no legal claim on you anymore. Leaving you and trying to sell you ends any parent rights. You could go to the home for kids in the state capital, or ... Sarah's eyes held a spark of hope. "Or you could stay here with a tough old rancher who could use some help rebuilding. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise you'll be safe and loved." Sarah's smile was the first real one Frank had seen from her. "Like that, Mr. Morrison. I'd like that very much." As the sun rose over the burned remains of Frank's house, he looked at Sarah, helping gather their few remaining things. She wasn't Lucy, could never take his daughter's place. But she was something just as special. A second chance at being the father he'd always wanted to be. Dutch Morgan was tried and sentenced to hang. Frank Morrison and Sarah rebuilt their ranch together. making a home filled with the love and safety that had been missing from both their lives. Sometimes good things happen when you least expect them, coming in a torn dress and carrying more courage than grown men twice her age.